My grandmother used to have a saying that don't watch their mouth move, watch their feet move. Which was her way of saying, don't pay attention to the talk, pay attention to the walk. How do people actually act? And I think healthcare is a good place to start on that. Josh Hawley took taxpayer money and decided to go to court to wipe out every consumer protection in the law as it relates to you and your ability to have any kind of chance against powerful health insurance companies. And the one protection we've talked so much about is the protection for pre-existing conditions. Now, he may not remember the bad old days, but I do. I remember my father and mother moving in with me when I lived in Kansas City in a rental home, and I was working as an assistant prosecutor in Kansas City. This would have been in the 80s, early 80s. And my mom and dad had to move in with me because my dad had had some kind of breakdown and was really not capable of working. And so they moved in with me in my rental house, and Mom tried to find a job to help support him because Dad couldn't work. And we couldn't figure out what was wrong with Dad, and then we finally got the diagnosis, and he had a brain tumor. And he still had some leftover insurance from the job that he had had to leave because he was unable to work, but then he had nothing. And guess what? No insurance company wanted him. And he wasn't old enough for Medicare. They knew a brain tumor, and the consequences from a brain tumor, it's very expensive care. And I remember hearing my mother in the next room being very upset because she was so frightened about how we were going to manage care for my dad. And so when I ran for the Senate the first time, everywhere I went, someone talked to me about somebody in their family that couldn't get insurance. The insurance companies didn't want to insure people that they weren't going to make enough money off of. And so they just said no. And the high-risk pools failed. It didn't work. They were too expensive, too difficult to get in. And so that's how this protection came about. And now Missourians have come to really appreciate this protection. So Josh Hawley marches into court, and he doesn't tell the court, get rid of all of this other stuff but leave pre-existing conditions alone. Which, by the way, I mean, he went to Yale Law School, but I went to the Zoo Law School, and I can keep up. I just want you to know that there is a legal argument that can be made called severability. Are there any lawyers in the room? Okay, so you nodded your head. He could have said to the court, this is all unconstitutional, but leave pre-existing conditions alone. It's constitutional on its own, and it can stand alone. Because that's what he's saying now, right? He didn't do that. So his walk was one to get rid of all of it. So now the heat gets turned up, and it's election time. So what does he do? He looks at the camera and says, well, I'm for pre-existing conditions. That's called the talk. Because if his lawsuit is successful, there is nothing there. Now, I can see why he could really yell at me if we were in charge. But we're not in charge. The Republicans have every lever of power in Washington. They have done nothing in preparation for the possible success of this lawsuit. Now, another little factoid that will help you with your friends, ask yourself this. Why did the lawyers, when they argued this case the first week of September, why did they tell the judge not to make a decision until after November?
Really? Yeah.
True. They argued to the court, do not make a decision before November. Because they know what the outcome might be. They even said to the court, in open court, it will be chaos on the markets. Is that legal? Is that legal to do that? It's up to the judge. So the bottom line is, he knows knows that if his lawsuit is successful, there is no safety net there. There is nothing there. So the Republicans in Washington got a little worried about their candidates out here having to defend that they are marching towards trying to get rid of all this stuff. So they said, oh, we've got a good idea. We'll file a bill. And all the Republicans out there can hang their hat on that and say, oh, well, there's a bill for pre-existing conditions, and I'm for that. So they introduced a bill. Senator Tom Tillis from North Carolina put a bill in to protect pre-existing conditions. And immediately Josh Hawley said he was for it. This was going to be his save, right? If there's a bill that's going to be there and all we have to do is pass that and everything's okay. And then we read the bill, and guess what the bill said? Yeah, they've got to give you an insurance policy if you have a pre-existing condition, but they don't have to cover the pre-existing condition. Oh. So it's like a hoax, right? So if you have diabetes,
Ghost.
Senator Tillis's bill said if you have diabetes, an insurance company has to write you an insurance policy that they can put an asterisk and say, we won't pay for anything for your diabetes. Well, that doesn't even make any sense. That's what's called a press release proposal that's meant to try to influence voters who don't have access to the fine print. And so guess what? They quit talking about that bill. So it is important that everybody understand. He can say all he wants that he supports the concept, but what he is doing is jeopardizing the continuity of health care for every Missourian in this state that doesn't have insurance at work or is in a situation where they might be changing jobs and has ever been sick before. So I also think it's important for you to remember what else he's trying to get rid of. And let me just go through a few of them so it will remind you, listen, we've got work to do on health insurance and health care. I know that. And there's things we can do. We've got bills that are ready on a bipartisan basis that we could vote on today. Mitch McConnell has not allowed those votes, even though I think they would improve the exchanges for people. There's about 5% of Missouri that buys their insurance on the exchanges and doesn't qualify for subsidies, and these proposals would help that. But the point is that they're getting rid of some of the things, in the ACA that people have really grown to appreciate and don't want to go away. Like your kids staying on your policy until they're 26, that's gone if he's successful. The fact they can't charge women more for health insurance than men. Now I know we're a little more expensive because we have the babies, but you guys have something to do with it. So I don't think it's quite fair that women should have to pay the entire bill for us bringing children into the world. The 80-20 rule, and what the 80-20 rule is that insurance companies are required to spend 80 cents of every dollar on your actual health care. They can only do 20 cents of every dollar on CEOs' salaries and hiring more people to figure out ways to deny your claim. In other words, it limits their administrative costs. And if they violate that rule, they have to send you a check. That goes away. The discrimination that goes on in terms of the level of payment for people that live in rural areas versus urban areas, that's gone. And really importantly, and this is a really important one that no one has talked about yet, and that is what it's going to do to Medicare. What we did in the ACA is we took some of the profits from the Medicare Advantage insurance companies that were guaranteed profits. We gave them a haircut. And we took that money, and we also took some money from hospitals, said if you don't work harder on readmissions, you're going to get less money, and we used that money. Those two things combined, along with a few other smaller things, to give us enough money to fill the donut hole in Medicare prescription drug program. Does everybody know what the donut hole is?
Yes.
Okay, so what that is if you're on Medicare and you have there's Part D drug benefit, you get so much benefit until you've spent X amount of dollars, and then you have to go in your own pocket for $3,000 or $4,000, $5,000, and then the benefit kicks back in. We fill that hole in with that money. That will go away if Josh Hawley's lawsuit is successful. And free prevention in Medicare for mammograms, colonoscopies, that goes away if his lawsuit is successful. So there is a long list of things that Missourians want to hold on to that his lawsuit would get rid of. And I hope that you all will share those facts. And by the way, you can go on my website And there's two things you can look at that will help you. One at the top is a banner you can click on, and it'll give you all the fact checks of all the ads that have been run. Josh Hawley, I believe, has set a record for false. He set a record for false on a lot of ads that they're running against me. But the ads that we've run about his lawsuit and the impact of his lawsuit, over and over again, the independent fact checkers have said, yes, that's true. That is totally true. So you can share that with people who are confused by all the onslaught of television advertising that gets very hard to sort through. The other thing on the website that I'd urge you to look at is what I mentioned in the debate last night. And there is a list. We went through all of my accomplishments in the Senate and picked out the 100 best. Or I don't know best, maybe the 100 most impactful. But there is a list of 100 of my accomplishments in the U.S. Senate. And you can see the variety of things that I've made an impact on. From veterans benefits to bringing down prescription drug costs to contracting at the Pentagon. It is a wide variety of things. Food security, agri-terrorism. There is so many different topics that I've been able to make a difference on. And it's like what I said last night. The reason I've been able to get so much done is I try to spend more time finding people I can cooperate with than just yelling about the other side. You know, if you find common ground and you're willing to work with anybody, it's amazing what you can get done. And I think that's, frankly, what we need right now in Washington. We don't need another person to go out there and stand on one side of the room and say the other side stinks, which is pretty much what his campaign is. And I'm the one that he says stinks. So I'm hoping that Missourians figure that out. It will mention on that list a couple of bills that, in fact, I think the president has signed over 30 of my bills into law since he's been there. And one just a couple of weeks ago that relates to health care and keeping costs down is getting rid of gag clauses. And gag clauses were contractual obligations that pharmacies had that kept them from telling you that you could get your drugs more cheaply if you didn't use your plan. So you would go up to the window to get your cholesterol medicine, and your plan says you have to pay $20 for prescriptions, but your cholesterol medicine across the counter is $16. That pharmacist was by contract prohibited from telling you that, to save you that $4. Well, we made those contracts void against public policy. So now, when somebody comes up to, when you go up to the pharmacy window, the pharmacist can tell you, hey, you can save $5 by not using your plan. That's one example, and there's a lot of other examples in that list that impact health care. And then I want to, since we're in the laborers building, I think it's really important to stress something we talked about last night at some length, and that is workers' rights. Very rarely has there been an occasion where Missourians have spoken as loudly and as clearly as they did in August on workers' rights, on the ability of workers to come together and leverage their power for better wages and benefits. Defeating Prop A, it was not close. It was a 2-to-1 margin in Missouri. Half the people who voted in the Republican primary voted no on Prop A. Half the people in the Republican primary. So this has been a debate in our state, and Missouri has spoken very loudly, and it wasn't that long ago. And I thought it was fascinating last night in the debate stage, the shuffling that went on when that topic came up. First of all, he didn't even want to admit he voted yes on Prop A. And I've got news for him. If you're going to be a senator from Missouri, if you want to be a senator from Missouri, you better be willing to speak up and say how you feel about something and be willing to defend it. Because you can't make everybody happy in Missouri. I got news for you. Sometimes they tease me in Washington and they say, well, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? And I said, well, you know, in a way, it's kind of a blessing because no matter how I vote, half the people are mad. So it kind of frees you up to look and really figure out which is the right side. So I think that this is really fascinating that he didn't want to admit on stage. He said Missouri has spoken, but he didn't want to say that he disagreed with Missouri on it. So the question was, would you vote for a federal right-to-work law? And he said, well, I'd have to look at the bill. Well, I'm pretty sure he knows what it is. In other words, he just didn't want to say. It's a bad sign when somebody starts dodging this early in the game. I would highly recommend to him that he learn just to own up to what he believes in and say it and not try to dice it or slice it or dodge it. And then the next part of the workers' rights is the question that came next, which was on minimum wage. We have a chance to increase the minimum wage a very reasonable amount, 85 cents a year for several years until that amount would go to $12. This is not radical. I mean, Amazon has increased their minimum wage in their company to $15. We're talking about $12 years from now. Years from now. And so I know most Missourians support this increase in minimum wage. When you lift the floor, everything lifts a little. And that allows more people to not have to use government subsidies. And he was very clear last night that he opposed the increase in minimum wage. So I'm not taking any more lectures from Josh Hawley about how he's for the middle class and the little guy. I don't think he's for the middle class and the little guy. I think that's pretty clear. So workers' rights, health care, they are all on the ballot November 6th. And then obviously the last one, dark money. And listen, you know, what Josh likes to do is kind of like muddy the waters here by saying, well, there's dark money being spent for Claire McCaskill. Yeah, there is. But I have said over and over again, I don't care if the ad's for me or against me. If you can't figure out who's paying for it, ignore it. I think everybody ought to know who is paying the bill. I know this. If you pull back the curtain and found the people that have now paid for over $17 million of advertising for Josh Hawley, the vast majority of the money that's been spent for Josh Hawley has in fact been from out-of-state third-party groups, not from Josh Hawley. That's not the case in my campaign. You'd find people there trying to elect him that would make you nervous. I guarantee you, I've got pharmaceutical drug companies in the middle of my dartboard. But guess who they've got in the middle of theirs? That would be me. I'll guarantee you. I mean, I don't know and I'll never know, but I bet more than a nickel that the pharmaceutical drug companies are helping fund those ads. Wouldn't that change how you felt about them? If you knew, as I like to say, if Missouri knew who was paying for the ads against me, they'd like the enemies I've made. I think they would think I've done a pretty good job. And those ads are so incredibly false and unfair. And, you know, in fact, their whole narrative of the campaign against me is based on a falsehood. The whole narrative. And it has been said over and over again by every fact checker. I have never done anything in the United States Senate to help my family, ever. And every fact checker has said it. But that doesn't matter to them. That doesn't matter to them. They're going to keep repeating that falsehood because that's how badly they want this Senate seat. And isn't it sad? Because, you know, there's plenty of things we disagree on. Wouldn't it be refreshing that we could just talk about the things we disagree on, whether it is climate change, or whether it is tariffs, or whether it is minimum wage, or whether it is what we should be doing in the world as it relates to our national security? Wouldn't that be refreshing? That instead they have gone on a tear of personal destruction against me and my family. I would never do that. And if people were doing that on my behalf, I'd go after them. I would be publicly calling them out and saying, stop it. It is sad to me that it's occurred, but it's the reality. But you know what? We're going to overcome it, right?
Yes.